Rising inequality, the euro crisis, or mega regional trade deals like TTIP, lots of global economic issues the GED team is currently working on. To get a broader perspective on all those topics, we sat together with Nobel Prize winner Professor Joseph Stiglitz in the heart of Berlin.
Hello everybody, I'm Uli Schoof from the Global Economic Dynamics team, and we are joined today by the eminent economist, Nobel Laureate and Professor at Columbia University, Professor Joseph Stiglitz. Professor, thanks for having you today. The first issue I would like to discuss with you is the concept of inclusive growth. And how do you define inclusive growth? And what is really the difference between inclusive growth and what we call here in Germany the social economic market model?
So I think one of the important lessons that have come out of research out of the last 30 years is growth doesn't need to be inclusive. That is to say, trickle-down economics, the idea that you could have growth and everybody benefits, a rising tide lifts all boats, is not true. So there is the danger that you have growth which leaves most people behind. And that's exactly what's happened in the United States, where the top 10% has seen growth, the bottom 90% has seen stagnation. We've been having here a discussion on looking at the data, and correct data suggests that things are even worse than what has been commonly perceived. The second idea that I think is really important is that we've now come to understand that shared growth or inclusive growth is actually more likely to be sustained and faster growth. So that there's both change of the causality are different. It used to be thought that increasing those GDP numbers helped everybody. But now we know that helping everybody actually is good for increasing the GDP numbers. Now, in terms of the model of the German social market economy, that's very linked with this last idea. Because if there is an economic framework that ensures that whatever prosperity a country has, it's more likely to be shared, that means it's more likely to be both sustainable growth and robust growth. One aspect to link this to standard economics, there was a long time a belief that markets, by and large, were efficient. And then we came to understand that there were a large number of market failures. They don't deal with the environment. Obviously, they don't deal well with financial stability, the banking system. Lots of instances where markets don't do well. There are two fundamentals, though, where the failures, or three fundamentals, where the failures are so great that there is a big role for the government. One of these is that markets typically don't provide adequate social protection. That our system, we don't have private unemployment insurance, systems of public health insurance work so much better, and some of the theories that I've developed explain why that is the case. So social protection, in one way or another, core to the social market economy, is an important market failure where you need a role for government. Secondly, even the most ardent advocates of the markets never said that the distribution of income that came out of that would be fair, acceptable. But normally, or in the past, we said, don't worry about that. We would use the political mechanism to redistribute. Now we know that the political mechanism often fails. And in fact, if you have a lot of economic inequality, it's likely to fail more because money talks. Money is important in politics. But we now also know that when you have more economic inequality, the system doesn't do as well. So that inequality is in itself a market failure because it is an important aspect of the well-functioning of the market system. And the final thing, which is related to my book that's coming out in October, is that at the core of wealth creation, at the core of increases in our standard of living, is innovation, learning. And markets on their own don't do well on that either. And that you need an important role of government to promote learning, to promote basic R&D, to create the basis of a learning society.
Let me come back to the social market economy model in Germany. You said yesterday that it has to be adapted to some extent. The question would be, how should it be adapted? And particularly if you look at Germany as a country where income inequality is rising pretty fast. So what we see within the last years is really a very fast rise in income inequality. So what's your take on this, particularly with regard to how to adapt the social economic model in Germany?
So in the 21st century, I say that there are two problems that are an order of magnitude bigger than they were in the 19th and 20th century. The first of these is this growing inequality, that there are aspects of the economic, social structures that in most countries of the world are leading to more inequality. We have to study what those are, counter them, but as we're doing that, we can't allow it to grow. And that's where the social market economy becomes very important. The 21st century is also an innovation economy. And though we often don't think of this as an important part of the social market economy, access to learning is an important part of social cohesion. That if some people have access to knowledge and others don't, we used to talk about the digital divide, that the understanding how computers work and being embedded in that kind of new technology. If the poor don't and the rich do, that's going to increase the divide. So that this whole thinking of the fundamentals of an innovation economy, of a learning society, as part of the 21st century social market economy.
Our team is currently conducting a survey in different countries, in 8 countries, so an international survey on inequality perception. And because, of course, inequality is particularly income inequality, is perceived from people differently, maybe even differently perceived in different countries. That's why we do this. What is your take on inequality perception? I mean, how does it matter? And what's your take on this?
Well, I think these perceptions are very important. Let me talk a little bit from the American experience, because obviously the perceptions that I know most. Americans for a very long time believed in the American dream. They believed that we were a land of equal opportunity. One of the things that's happened maybe in the last decade, last half decade, is they are beginning to believe that that's not true. They are, and this is an example where reality and perceptions has been very far apart, but there is when that far apart, there's obviously tensions, and gradually people their perceptions got brought closer to reality. So the fact that we are so far from a land of equal opportunity, the fact that we have become, among the countries, of advanced countries, a country with the least equality of opportunity, is beginning to sink in. And think tanks have played an important role, but life's experience has been probably the most important. You know, the old story was that each generation was going to be better off than the last. We've now had 2 generations where things are going the other way. Each generation is struggling to keep up with the parents. And right now, kids graduating from college, they know they have to go to college to get ahead in life. We don't have free college education. The average student is graduating with $25,000 of debt. But if you want to get ahead and you go to a reasonably good school, you go to a master's program, you're winding up with $100,000 to $200,000 of debt. You want to take the job that you want to take to public service or environmental law or whatever, you can't do it. Your choices are limited, and now that we've had a weak economy, we think of our economy as stronger than that of Europe, but it's still a weak job market, especially if you're African American or Hispanic. You say, it's hard to get a job, let alone a job that can help me pay back the loans, let alone a job that's going to allow me to have what I thought of as the American dream. So we are in for a crash in perceptions, and you are seeing some of this in our politics. There is growing anger. And you see that in the rise of what people in Europe must think as a lunatic American right, out of touch with reality, with normal conventions of political discourse. It's a reflection of anger, and people who give voice to that anger, a kind of populism on the right side, that is what happens when there is now perception that the American economic system is unfair. More than 50% of Americans have come to believe that the game is stacked against them. That's a perception that's extraordinarily important for the social cohesion.
As you were mentioning the American dream, I think with regard to the findings we will get from this study, do you think we will see huge differences between the perception of people, for example, in the US or in Sweden or in Germany?
I think there will be very marked differences. Some of these have to do with differences in reality, and some of these have to do with differences in, you might call, national mood, which I find always culture, very interesting. There are some countries who, when I look at them, seem to have very nice lifestyles, but they're always dour and don't think of, Americans are optimistic. Their life is going into the tubes, and they say, golly, things are wonderful, so that's
I like this attitude.
So, I come from the Midwest in Indiana, and we're very optimistic, and things are getting worse and worse, and you have a smile on your face. So some of that's going to show up, but I think some of it is going to be the real differences across country. And one of the things that came out with the Bertelsmann report, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals in different countries, was how different things are, even within Europe. And you have Sweden up there, Slovenia, so it's even some of the, up there in a lot of the social indicators. And you have some countries that were very down. And so it will be interesting to see the extent to which these real differences in social statistics, income, child mortality, life expectancy, get reflected in their realization, their perception of how well off they are.
Let me switch now to a different topic, which is what we call it the emergence of a new world trade order based on mega regional trade agreements like TTIP and TPP or RCEP or FTAAP. And we're doing a lot of research on those. And I would like to get your opinion on this kind of development. On the one hand, what does it mean in terms of the World Trade Order? Do we see some kind of block building here of these mega regional trade agreements? And what does it mean also for developing countries in terms of inequality between different countries? What is your opinion on that?
As an economist, I am very critical of these regional trade agreements. And I think every trade economist is on that side, that the trade approach ought to be multilateral, including the whole world. That was the reason for the WTO being founded. Yes, there are some problems, but the reason there are problems is the United States won't get rid of its cotton subsidies. These are not inherent problems. These are the fact that some countries are not willing to create a free trade world. So to say that there's a problem, that we have to go to these regional blocks, is to say that we don't believe in free trade. So, and then to say what we want, we're committed to it, is hypocrisy. So why am I concerned with a global system? And this is breaking up the global system. There are several reasons. First, from a view of what is going on in each of them, to some extent, the success of each is based on trade diversion rather than trade creation. Economists have always talked about, and it's very explicit in the case of TPP, that this is China, the major country in Asia, is left out. The United States has said very explicitly who's going to be making the rules for Asia. We want to be making the rules, not China. Now, that's obviously not going to prevail in the long run. The largest country in Asia is going to dominate in the rulemaking for Asia. So I think we're in a fantasy world to think that we can dictate the rules for Asia. But the way it's structured is exclusionary. In terms of inequality, there's also a concern. What is the two big regions left out? The big region is Africa, the poorest region in the world. What was the basis of the 2001 agreement to go ahead and create a global trade agreement? It was the new development round. It was to rectify the balances of the past and bring in the developing countries. We've totally reneged on that. And so these agreements are not designed to rectify the imbalances, and they could increase inequalities, global inequalities. Now let me come to TTIP. I think that's a particularly bad agreement, and let me say why. It's not about trade. Trade barriers between Europe and America, tariffs have already come down, basically very, very low. Little changes in the exchange rate do more to change competitivity than wiping out the tariffs. So the fact is that the instability in exchange rates caused by lack of harmonization of monetary policy is a far bigger impediment to trade than any of the tariffs.
But the trade costs relating to non-tariff trade barriers,
So then the question is the non-tariff barriers. Now the question then is, what are those non-tariff barriers? Those are basically regulations. Regulations are important to our citizens. They're important for health, education, the environment, even the management of the economy. We realized that we didn't have the right financial sector regulation, and that's why we have the global financial crisis. These are very contentious and difficult issues. Within the United States, we don't have harmonization of regulation. We have 50 different states that are writing all kinds of regulations. So before the United States says we ought to have international harmonization, why doesn't the United States have harmonization within the United States? Well, the part of the answer is you don't have to have harmonization in lots of different areas. The question is, where do you have to have harmonization and when don't you? When is it important? When isn't it important? And how, when you need harmonization, is the best way to go about it? So to me, this is at the heart of democracy. I don't want my trade representative to be doing harmonizing because I know whose interest he represents. He represents producer interest. So what they want is not, we're not really interested in harmonization, let me make it clear. If it were harmonizing the top, they would be yelling. What they want is stripping away regulation, harmonizing down. They're not saying, okay, let's harmonize standards on intellectual property to make access to generic medicines more accessible for everybody, that'll lower the price and that will improve health care. And that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about, say, this idea of exclusive data, which is a way of making drug prices higher, reducing access to generic medicine, extending that for biologics to 12 years. Even President Obama opposes that. But his trade minister, the USTR, is taking a position that is extreme, even for the United States, and insisting on that for TPP and TTIP. So that's harmonizing to a standard that is in the advantage of big pharma against American people, European people, generics, access to health. So we wouldn't have that if we had an open debate in Congress and European Parliament. They would not accept this. It's being done this way because the big pharma knows it can't get it through our Parliament, through a Congress. And it's using an end run in secret to get around democratic process. Now, the most invidious aspect of it is the investment agreement, the ISDS. Germany played a very important role in opposing this. And let me explain why that's really a very dangerous provision. And that alone is reason to reject it. The USTR has said it's important to protect property rights. You might say there might be some grain of truth that this was a trade agreement between, say, Zaire and the United States. It's not. It's a trade agreement between the United States and Germany, the United States and the EU. You have better property rights protections than the United States. You're not worried about the United States, and we shouldn't be worried about you. Yeah. You even have a higher court. If your courts abuse property rights, we can appeal to a higher court, the European Court. So it's not about property rights. Let me make it clear. It's not about property rights. What is it about? It's about stopping Parliament, the European Parliament, the US Congress, from passing regulations that would protect our economy, our people, our health. So under this provision, Philip Morris is suing Uruguay for the loss of expected profits because Uruguay passed a regulation saying that cigarettes have to be labeled dangerous for your health, which they are. And a result of that regulation, people reduced smoking. And a result of that, Philip Morris lost profits. And now the taxpayers in Uruguay are being asked to give money, the money that Philip Morris would have made from killing the Uruguayan people. And the judicial process, except not, I couldn't call it a judicial process, this private court that they've established is so expensive that the Uruguay can't afford it. It can't afford to defend itself against Philip Morris. Fortunately, Mayor Bloomberg is coming to the rescue. He says it's unacceptable that America would have passed a law that is exposing Uruguay to death. And so he's coming to help Uruguay. This should not be the kind of legal framework. So this is an attempt to increase the power of corporations to run our economies, our societies. It's not a trade agreement.
But isn't this to some extent dangerous for developing countries? Because if for example, if there are trade agreements between developed and developing countries that say they will not invest in that country if there is no
we have evidence in that. It's absolutely not true. Okay. And I take Brazil. Brazil, which happens to have a very informed civil society and an active, so this is the country that really understands what's going on. They have said they will never sign an agreement with an ISDS provision. And they have said they've looked at the data, no effect on their foreign investment. People come in if it's attractive. South Africa has said exactly the same. They're canceling their agreements. They say, we're open for foreign investment. We want foreign investment. This is not being attractive for foreign investment. What we want is to persuade citizens in our country that we treat them with the same respect we treat citizens of foreign countries. Because in the end, you want an environment that treats property rights right. And when you're saying you have to be a foreigner to get good property protection, you're saying it's bad for domestic investors. So let's create an environment that is the right environment for investment, foreign or domestic.
But you know, it's interesting because I think it's today or tomorrow that the EU Commissioner Malmström is just proposing new ideas on this kind of ISDS, and the idea is so far to have this kind of international trade court and to say, but you would not say, you know, not make it any better, just leave it aside? Or not trying to make it better?
If you have it, you have to make it better. Having a private... The judicial system is one of the most important parts of the public good. And you don't privatize the judicial system.
Right.
I mean, that should be fundamental. Now, the question is, okay, if we have a public judicial system, that's, to me, necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because then the question is, what is the law that the judicial system has to interpret? A law that says you have to compensate for the loss of expected profits from the passage of a regulation for protection of the public interest is a bad law. Think about this, you know, go back 40 years. Assume you had that law in place and you discover that asbestos is dangerous. We didn't know asbestos was dangerous. We discovered asbestos was dangerous, and what happened? The asbestos manufacturers had to compensate for the damage that it did, deaths. We had to redo our buildings. What would have happened now under the new law? The government of Germany would have to pay the asbestos manufacturers for their lost profits from the regulation that says you cannot kill people. That's not the right legal framework. So yes, you know, there is some legal framework, but already we have a legal framework against expropriation.
Professor, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.